You're listening to the StatsBomb Football Podcast.
One half a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us.
Welcome back to the StatsBomb Football Podcast, second episode of the week as we continue to make up for spring break. I am your host, Seth Partnow, joined as always by our head of football analysis, the coach, Matt Edwards. Matt, how you doing?
Great. How are you doing? 2 times a week. That's a great schedule.
Yeah. And I feel like this is a very special moment because our guest today, while Ted is on vacation, is in charge of building the wonderful platform tools we have for American football. Shane, would you like to introduce yourself on your very first podcast appearance of your life?
Yeah, it's a real long-time listener, first-time caller situation for me. So happy to be here. My name's Shane Regal. I'm the product manager for the American football team at StatsBomb.
And what we're going to talk about today is a lot about spring ball, and you're going to a spring game this weekend.
Yep, I grew up in State College, Pennsylvania. I did not go to Penn State, but I will be at the Penn State Blue-White game this Saturday. So excited to talk about what I should be looking forward to on Saturday and what I can take away from the first game of the year, if you want to call it that.
I mean, I think the first thing you're going to take away from it is a hangover, but but that's you mean in football terms, right?
Yes, of course.
I gotta know, do they stripe the stands for the spring game? Is it a whiteout? What's the tradition for Penn State at the spring game?
There's no whiteout or stripe out, but they have like a carnival set up. They get a pretty big crowd. It's usually 50,000 plus. So it's free entry, so it's always a good time.
That's awesome.
So before we get into talking further about spring games, we've already done the Baja Blast of the week, I suppose, on Monday's pod. So I guess it would be the second Baja Blast of the week. I don't know, what would be the Code Red of the week?
Oh, man, Code Red. These are the good old days. Just Halo 2, Code Red. Oh man, taking me back. I don't know. I feel like 2 in a week's too much. I don't have anything particular for the Baja Blast or the Code Red of the week for this pod.
All right. Do you have a terrible food item we can talk about after we dug in on the chizza?
No, I'll come up with one. Maybe we have one at the end.
All right. So sharp left turn, spring football. What can we learn from these games with Shane as a super fan of PSU? What should he be looking for on Saturday, aside from the grill with the best smoke coming out of it?
Yeah, this does seem like, before Shane talks about stuff, we'll have to get his grilling ideas for tailgate on Saturday. But I think that for spring games, it's such a vast outcome of what people are trying to do. You have teams that just treat it like a practice. You know, I've been part of staffs where our quote unquote spring game is just a 15th practice at the stadium. Sometimes you invite fans, and when you have a practice, you get fewer fans and it's not quite as fun for them. And then at times you have this big production where it's a full-fledged game. There are, refs, it's televised. And I think that depending on what you're looking for as you're like a staff getting ready for your team, it really can depend. Even when you have a full spring game, you're generally not showing a whole ton. And so it's going to be just kind of basic plays. If you have some really established players, they may play a drive. They may be held out the whole time. But really, for me, I think a spring game is a really good opportunity to see new and young players. So I'm interested to see, as we get the kind of influx of transfers and people kind of overturning their roster every year, if we see an increase in the importance of spring games, because these are going to be opportunities to really get your new transfers on the same page with what you're doing, get them used to a game day experience before you're playing, next fall. So I think that I'm interested to see how that goes. But generally, it's always been an opportunity to see kind of young guys, new guys that are going to be on your roster that you haven't seen before, and get a chance to see kind of the next phase of what you can expect as a fan.
With the young guys, what about if you have highly touted incoming freshmen? This, I would say, especially at say quarterback. What is the impact on the spring game? If, well, all right, here's the caretaker quarterback, but we have, you know, this 5-star coming in who's going to be the starter from day one, or we're going to have a competition, which if you were recruited said 5-star, probably not, but.
Yeah, I wonder what, Shane, when you had Drew Aller, I'm sure you went to that spring game and he probably played pretty well. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what that looks like for kind of an established starter, but someone who's supposed to be kind of the next great thing, bringing him in as the quarterback, what that looks like.
Yeah, I do remember that year there was a lot more excitement for Aller than there was for Sean Clifford. Even though Clifford had a very nice long career at Penn State, there was a lot of excitement from the fan base to see, you know, especially Aller's arm, because that was the thing touted, is the arm strength. So yeah, there's always a lot of excitement on the new shiny toy than the established starter that you kind of know what you're going to get.
I think that's an interesting combination to think about, is when you do have those new players. You know, I think a lot of Ohio State's new players, you know, Jeremiah Smith, their receiver, I think he was recently the fastest player to have the black stripe taken away, which is like he becomes, quote, part of the team once that happens. He's making ridiculous plays in practice all the time. You know, he's someone that's going to draw a lot of eyeballs and a lot of attention. And for those coaches, they obviously think that he's going to be a big part of this team this fall. And so the spring game is going to be an opportunity to say, look, you're playing, this is a game-like experience, treat it like a game, get him, you know, a game without having that count against his clock, really. And so, you know, I think Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee is another good example of a highly touted quarterback who came in and, you know, had an opportunity to play. And so I think it really is a good opportunity for these coaches, if they are going to have like a true spring game, to treat it like an actual game. They don't want to do too much to put stuff on film, but you want to be able to test their abilities and their skills. So you got to kind of throw them out there a little bit and see what happens.
So for teams that are playing a genuine game, obviously we're playing a game, we're keeping stats. Is there anything you can take away from that? Does any of that actually matter? I saw somewhere on Twitter that is like, if your quarterback looks good, that means your defense sucks, and if your defense looks good, that means your quarterback sucks, as a way of evaluating spring game. But surely there's more you can take away than that, or is there?
Yeah, I think so. Teams will set up how they scrimmage as well. So some teams will go ones versus ones. Some will go one offense versus two defense, and one defense versus two offense, so that both sides can feel really good about themselves. So I think you have to be really careful as a fan with what you're seeing. But then as a coach, you have a good way to kind of manage your expectations as well. You know, if you're an offensive minded coaching staff, you know, head coach who's an offensive guy, you're probably going to want to see the offense do well, and you're going to want to script them for success and make it so that they are successful and have positive vibes going into the off season. But a lot of times it's like any practice, but the intensity's ramped up a little bit, you know, especially if you're at a place like Penn State, like Shane was saying, with 50,000. It's not, I don't know how big Beaver Stadium is. What is 110,000? But it's not going to be that crazy Saturday night game whiteout atmosphere, but there's a little bit more intensity, a little bit more anxiousness for people as they're playing. So you get to get a chance to see how people perform a little bit under pressure. I'm interested to hear Shane. I know, Shane, you're a big baseball guy. When you think about like spring training and baseball and how that is versus, you know, making it to the big leagues or the regular season, you know, how does that compare, do you think, to like spring games and spring practices and preparing for the regular season?
Yeah, I played college baseball, so I come from that world. So I think the thing in spring training is, you know, you kind of always ignore the he's in the best shape of his life trope that comes out, which comes out in college football too after the winter workouts. You always hear about Penn State hands out like the winner of the day from whatever workout they're doing, which is always fun to see, but how valuable is that? But the thing in spring training that you can kind of take away from baseball is sort of exit velocity, launch angle, the fastball metric, spin rate, those sorts of things don't lie in the same way that, the performances can based on who's playing and whatnot. So, you're trying to find those specific metrics that kind of you can't lie about. And they're kind of context independent because, you either hit the ball or not, hard or not, or, you put the right amount of spin on it or not.
This is something that I'm just unclear on because I'm not a big baseball guy. For spring training, do they have all of those? I don't even know what sort of like in stadium technology things they have set up. Do they have those set up in those spring training games as well? Like, are they collecting? You talked about exit velo, and I'm just going to sound dumb if I try and talk baseball stuff here, but they have that all set up in spring training, don't they?
Yeah, we could talk about induced vertical break and all that, but yeah, they do. So like the Pirates play in their single A stadium, they have that internally. And even at like the AAA level, it's starting to get out publicly too, some of those metrics. So they have all that.
I mean, a lot of teams they've almost built or arranged their spring training and off-season facilities around having that ability to collect that, whether it's TrackMan, StatCast, Rapsodo, whatever they're doing to sort of get that very detailed info, because as Shane is saying, it's those process-based things, not the outcome. It's just like, all right, well, we wanted him to work on, getting his curveball more vertical break instead of horizontal. How have we done in terms of changing like the spin rate efficiency and stuff like that? And I think we can get super nerdy on that, but I think that's a good segue, I guess, because I think what you're sort of alluding to, Matt, talking about sort of the top line stuff is you're doing much more qualitative than saying, well, he averaged 4.3 yards per rush. And that means therefore ... It's, breaking it down even further. Traditionally, what have teams done? Have they chart those games the same way as they do a regular season game? How much of that sort of charted material matters?
Yeah, I think that the practice data that is collected is in no way as robust as what teams are doing during a season, but there is some amount of collection that happens, input by graduate assistants or analysts who are going in right after practice, putting in the play calls, potentially some pass completion information, complete, incomplete. And so at the end of spring practices, oftentimes coaches will look at some really basic stats from any either 11 on 11 or live situations, but you're not tackling all that much in spring often because you're wanting to avoid some big injuries because they'll be out for the season at this point. So even if you have some amount of stats, you're always treating them as if you can explain them away. Like, oh, well, we had 3 yards per rush in spring on our inside zone plays, but it was just that it wasn't tackle and we're going to be better during the season. And so there is a lot of that where it's not necessarily the same level of quantitative analysis that you're going to do during the season. But I think that that's an intriguing thing that is potentially missing from spring practices, whether it's a spring game or just spring practice. And then overall practice in general, I think, is how much data can you take from a practice and either use that in player analysis or scheme analysis as you're trying to build something. If you've been part of a coaching staff that's together for a really long time, you're probably not doing a lot of scheme change. You may be making a couple of tweaks here or there, but with how quickly staffs change over in the college ranks, you're going to be regularly having a new offensive staff or defensive staff. Penn State's got a new OC coming in. They have a couple of same coaches from before, but it'll be interesting to see when you're talking about data for spring, how much is going to be used to make some big time decisions, whether it's who's going to be playing, who are you going to be counting on. The spring transfer portal window opens up on Monday, and that's going to be after spring ball for a lot of teams that are going to say, all right, this was spring practice. This is how we performed. We thought we had better receivers than we did based on whatever metrics you're using, whether it's qualitative data, coach saying, hey, our guys suck, we need to go get better guys. But you can use some data as you're going to get into this spring transfer portal window as well to say, all right, this is what our team looked like. What do we need? What do we need to take us over the top or to the next level for fall?
So I'm going to posit that a lot of the data that we collect, especially, tracking based physical metrics, pass locations, blocking information, stuff like that, is to some degree equivalent of the stuff that Shane is talking about in terms of the exit velo, launch angle, spin rate, that sort of stuff. How would you evaluate that statement, and B, like, what would the pieces of that you would be looking at coming out of a spring game to say, all right, this is pretty good. We like this guy. This guy, like, maybe this guy isn't wide receiver 3. Maybe he's based on this performance, maybe we should give him a look as our number 1 guy or something like that.
I think some of the physical metric stuff like speeds and acceleration, if you're a team at the top level of college football, you have catapult wearables that you can get some of that information on. If you're a low level team, you may not have those on everybody. And even those top level teams, they have it maybe on 40, 50 guys. Obviously the SEC and Big Ten probably has them on every single player and can get some pretty good speed and acceleration information there. But when you're looking at physical metrics, that's going to be a big deal and can help make some decisions and give you some more information. But then I think a lot of the contextual data that we get from the tracking data could be really helpful. I remember when I was working at the University of Virginia, I was reaching out to people when I first got the job of director of football analytics. And one of the people I reached out to was Kratik Malhotra, who's at Texas A&M now. He's the director of sports science. He may have some assistant athletic director title as well. But I remember talking with him and asking him what he was doing and if he could give me any tips. And the biggest tip that he gave me, and he said this over and over, I mean, we talked for 20 minutes on the phone and he probably said it 10 or 15 times, was you need to collect data in practice like it's a game. And at the time I was like, okay, we collect some stuff, and I was feeling pretty good about what we were doing. But then after a year or two, seeing what we would get in-game data and what we were trying to create with game reports, I finally caught what he was trying to say, is that the more data that you have in practice, the more opportunities you're going to have to see what your team actually is. It's not like baseball where you have 162 games and season feels like it lasts forever. And now I'm just going to be crapping on baseball here, but you only get 12 regular season games in college football. NFL gets a little bit more, but for each of those games you get 5 practices. You get I think it's 30 fall camp practices, 15 spring practices. And so each one of those is a really genuinely awesome opportunity to get actionable data. And if you're not getting or collecting data on your own, you're really missing an opportunity to better evaluate your team.
Yeah, and one thing specifically I'm looking for on Saturday is Abdul Carter's changing positions. So he's moving from linebacker to edge. Now, I don't know if he's going to play that much because of the injury risk that you mentioned. But assuming he does, you mentioned the physical metrics, get off time, get off distance. Those would be things I would be looking at for him specifically because he's changing positions.
Do you think he can replicate Chop Robinson's get off distance?
I mean, hopefully,
that's a no.
They always talk about how the plan was for Micah Parsons to move from linebacker to edge, and then the COVID season happened and he opted out, and you've seen what he's done with the Cowboys. So the thought here is kind of a similar position change could unlock Abdul on the edge.
How much of the spring game would be about sort of setting a baseline to then see, all right, we're back for fall camp. Presumably, like most of your players, aside from being injured, have been in programs over the summer as well. Especially for younger players, how do we do? How much have we improved? What's their trajectory? Is that a little bit of what you're talking about with making sure you're tracking that stuff from practice, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. When you finish your season, at this point, you're changing over a lot of your team with newcomers and transfers. And so I think every team's going to be treating it a little bit differently. For Colorado and I think it was North Texas or Texas State, where they had to get 50 new players on their team in one season. It's a lot of just like finding out who these people are, what they do. And then during the summer workouts, you're getting information from the strength coaches on, hey, this is what it's looking like. These are players' numbers and their testing and everything like that. But if you're a team like Penn State, I don't know how many new transfers in and out they have, but like Shane's talking about, they have some position changes. They have a new offensive coordinator, obviously, and a big question mark, I think, for them. I don't know if it's every year, but feels like every year is who's going to be playing receiver. What does that look like? I know, Shane, having been a fan of them, what are you looking for from this like offense for the season, but for the spring game as well?
Yeah, they actually have 3 new coordinators. So all 3 coordinators are turning over for them, with Manny going to Duke and then the special teams coordinator. So I am interested to see what it looks like. From your experience, what do coaches actually put on film in the spring game? Will I actually learn anything from this? But there's definitely going to be, a lot of people looking to see some more separation from the receivers, because that's something they struggled with last year. And then also more explosive plays downfield, because they scored a lot. If you look at a lot of the, the point-based metrics, Penn State scored a lot on offense last year, but they weren't particularly explosive. They did a lot of long grinding drives. And then the 2 games that matter, Michigan and Ohio State, they didn't score. So it was putting up a lot of points in the rest of this schedule and, not a lot of explosive plays, throughout the season.
So I feel like we've still kind of danced around, okay, there's metrics and you're watching for these things, but really, what are we taking away? It seems like it's a mix between sort of evaluation and generating excitement and exuberance. But if we're an outside analyst or we're a coach on a team who, okay, you give the interview after the spring game and everything's great, but what are we really like breaking down and seeing, and what are you confident of, whether it's good or bad, coming out of the spring game versus what is just sort of we got a nice workout there? Yeah,
I think it really just depends on what you as a staff are looking for. Oftentimes, I think we've mentioned a little bit, is when you're looking for those younger players, we have, like for Penn State, they have the transfer receiver from Ohio State coming in. I think they have 1 or 2 returners at receiver. If I were them, I would really go all out with this offensive staff and say, look, we are going to go for it in the spring game. We're going to try a couple of new things. We want to be more explosive. Is that actually happening? Who is going to step up at receiver and make some plays? And, you have obviously done that through 14 practices up until the spring game. And hopefully you've collected some data there and said, all right, whether it's target percentage or yards per route run, I mean, there is some pretty interesting information you can get without fancy tracking data. It may take you a while to input that data, but really, I mean, it's worth it as you're trying to see who your players are. But I think a lot of it depends on your team. Your team needs where you were the previous season and where you're expecting to go for the 2024 season. If you were a team like, Shane was talking about with Penn State, you struggle with big plays, you struggle with offensive passing creativity or whatever it may be, you're going to want to try and stress that, just as if you're lifting weights, you want to stress your muscles so you can get stronger. You want to stress those opportunities and say, all right, well, we have done 14 practices trying to see if we can get better in this area. Now here's our one great opportunity to see how that went, where we're at, and really put these people into tricky situations. I have a funny spring game situation from when I played at BYU. I remember I was playing, it was kind of late in our quote spring game, and there was a pass that I was thrown over the middle of the field. I think I was running like an over, and I ended up dropping it. It was like right on the end zone, and I came off on the sideline the next play, and our offensive coordinator looked at me and said, "That was probably your only chance to catch a touchdown in this stadium." And I was like, "Oh, is this him telling me that was my opportunity to prove where I was at?" And I'd failed. But I think that the spring game really is what you design it to be. And so coaching staffs have to be really thoughtful on what they're looking for in who they want to try and test and target and grow, and what they want from their team, based on where they were last season to where they're going to be next season.
Yeah, Matt, that leads into an idea I have that I'm interested in validating. So kind of a hypothesis. You mentioned earlier the transfer portal. I'm wondering if, over the next couple of years, we see the spring transfer portal. It's always going to be less volume because it's shorter, and I think the number of players will be lower. But I'm wondering if it'll be more impactful. So the winter portal, I did some research last year internally, and a big chunk of that is water kind of finding its level, players moving down competition level. Another big chunk of it was coaches leaving. So as you'd expect, when coaches leave, transfers go up. And then obviously you have your big names who are moving between teams, or lower level guys moving up. But I'm wondering if, after the spring, that really gives teams the ability to evaluate their team better, because the winter one's so close to the end of the season, even with all these new personnel jobs that are opening up on staffs. Do they really have the time to evaluate the transfer portal in the winter? And, the coach is changing. They get the springtime to settle in and see what they have. Will that make it easier for them to kind of target a guy in the portal who might have a bigger impact?
I have sort of an add-on to that question. I think a topic we're going to hit on a future podcast is the rise of that sort of player personnel GM role. And I'm almost wondering if like this identification of needs almost means to some engineering of sort of essentially trades of we've got some extra linebackers. This guy's pretty good. We like him, but he's not going to play. We really like that your fourth receiver, who doesn't seem like he's happy being your fourth receiver. Let's see if we can do some things here. But anyway, that's just something I had to posit on top of that. But I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on Shane's thesis there, Matt.
Yeah, it almost feels like in-season free agency in the NFL, right? Where teams are like, hey, look, we've played a couple of games. This is where we're at. We need another receiver. Let's go get a receiver, and that's going to be what takes us over the top. As the season ends, everything is so volatile, right? You don't know who is leaving from your own team, whether they're going to go to pro or whether they're going to enter the transfer portal. You're trying to like replace guys as they leave. It's similar, Shane, like if you're Washington, or I can't think of a coach that left late, but let's say you have your regular transfer portal window, everything's crazy, you're getting your staff ready or your team ready, you have people leave to go pro, you have people leave in the transfer portal, you bring in a bunch of transfers, and then a month later, let's say your coach leaves, and then your transfer portal window's open again for your team, right? They can all leave, but you can't bring people in. So now it's like, okay, now we have the spring window. We've had a little bit of time for spring ball. Now is the time where we're going to say, okay, this is what we know we have. This is what we know we want. And we're going to go identify a couple of people. So I think that's really insightful thought, Shane, on what the difference is between those two portal openings. I think a good example of somebody like Bear Alexander was a really big name player that left Georgia. He ended up at USC, and he's actually doing something similar timing wise is in the transfer portal again for the spring window, where that was a situation where USC's like, hey, we need another D lineman. We're going to go get a guy that can help us to the next level. Quarterback is probably not a position. That's probably a position that happens still in the off season. It's a little bit more, clean. We have one guy, we have a guy that we like or we don't like, we're going to go get somebody. But especially those other positions where it's, you have 3 or 4 guys that are playing receiver, or you go through camp and maybe you lose a guy to injury who's an offensive lineman who is now going to miss the whole season. You're like, okay, well, we need somebody to place in here. I think that's going to be really interesting to see as it goes forward what that looks like. But I do think that's going to be a really good idea of what that spring window looks like.
I want to think about this from the player side a little bit, sort of gaming it out in terms of, for no other reason, just like maximizing your NIL money I think that's going to be an interesting thing, is if certain players or their sort of advisors are going to be savvy enough to recognize if, hey, maybe we have better leverage in the April window than we do in the first window. Or is it a situation where, you see it in free agency in sports, amazingly in the NBA, a lot of contracts get signed at 12:01 or get agreed to on 12:01. And I think at least in these gold rush days of NIL, my guess is that a lot of like collectives and teams are we have all this money, got to spend it now, and not necessarily being strategic in terms of, if we hold some of that back, maybe the later window, it might be more impactful for us because we'll actually get a real look at our next year's team from spring play. And so let's spend our money then.
Yeah, I think the NIL question is really interesting. When you look at, I think everybody knows somebody that's in the business world that is changing jobs every like 9 months or a year. It feels like they're going from one corporation to another. And usually I would assume that it's money related, right? They're trying to chase salary and whatever. And
the bonus is not going to sign itself.
Yeah. And so I think that you could see that happening in college with these players, as long as the unlimited transfer rule is open. But there are benefits to staying in one place and growing and earning more money at that place. And so I think it is an interesting thought for these players. They really have to not just analyze, something shiny at this other school, it's a little bit more money. Well, is that actually going to be a better situation? I think I saw Steven Jackson talking about Haley Van Lith, who was at Louisville and had a pretty good NIL deal there, and was like, oh, well, I can make a little bit more at LSU. And now she was overshadowed a little bit by Angel Reese and Flo J and a couple other players. And now she's entering the transfer portal again and may not have the same shine that she did when she was coming out of Louisville.
Got left on an island versus Caitlin Clark, which was
that's a stinging last memory for everybody that watched that game. That's a Haley Van Lith fan. But I think that there is some interesting corollaries there with what's going to be best for these players as they're looking for the transfer window. Is it going to be after spring ball? They get a chance to see what their coaching staff's like, and then they're like, all right, I'm out of here. Or is it after the season, hey, I'm going to take control of my situation and I'm going to go try and find a place that I want to be and that is going to work for me.
I mean, I think that's something that's obviously we're going to see it. As with everything NIL related, I think we're still so far away from any sort of equilibrium or best practices being understood, in the current Wild West scenario. I don't think maybe best practices isn't even a concept we should posit. But zooming out, you mentioned that part of the challenge of evaluating these spring games is you're not really sure what a given team is trying to accomplish. But zooming out, like, what can we, as sort of outsiders, a wider observer, how do we really approach coming out of spring game? I think more of this team or less of this team, or coming out of spring ball in general. Like, what would your approach be to that, Matt? And for both of you, like, what data points would you really be looking at if we're not necessarily the top line, production of yards and things like that are not as telling as they might be.
So I'm a fan of North Carolina State. Some of my former coworkers and coaches that I worked with are now there. And I was really excited when they signed Grayson McCall. I think he, had a great career at Coastal Carolina. And so for me, they had their spring game on last Saturday, I believe. They had a new running back who transferred in from Duke. They had Grayson McCall. I know that offensive staff and I know their scheme really well. And so I was really excited to see, like, what are the vibes coming from this offense? Like, is Grayson McCall going to keep up his record-setting performances that he had at Coastal? You know, the Duke running back transfer scored a touchdown in each one of his games. What does that look like? And so I think for fans, it's often just like vibes. What do we feel like? Did we have a good experience? And so I think it is tricky when you're a fan going to those games. What can we expect? What do we look like? And so, you know, Shane, what are your vibes for Penn State this Saturday?
The vibes are definitely excitement for the new offense for sure. And I think there's also, from a coaching point of view, that's a way to get, you know, more NIL money. Is, do the vibes look good? Go to the donors, say, hey, you saw what we did. Why don't you write another check? But I'm going to look at a lot of individual matchups, and obviously it's easier if it's 1v1. But, you know, are the receivers getting off the line against the cornerbacks? What does the separation look like? You know, stuff that's, you know, I won't look at the yards or catches, but I just want to see some separation, some get off, you know, that sort of thing. Same for, you know, if Abdul Carter is going up against, you know, the number one tackle, what does he look like? He's not going to get any sacks. They won't let him touch the quarterback, but is he getting off the block? You know, that sort of thing.
I think that's, I mean, a lot of those things are stuff that we track in our tracking data, right? Where it would be really beneficial for these coaches if they had that kind of information to say, all right, well, what does our separation look like for our new quarterback? What's our completion percentage? What's our completion percentage over expected for those receivers? What's our catch rate over expected? You know, a bunch of these stats that we're using to analyze players during the season, and the NFL guys are looking at when they're looking for players in the transfer or for the NFL draft. I think that's, you know, when we talked about fans' expectations with vibes, coaches, they have a couple of things there, but you know, or like Seth has said, I think we've danced around it a little bit, but really the tracking data could help so much with that extra, whether it's individual matchups, like we have our line battles engagement data. You know, you have a new edge rusher. It's like, how quickly was he actually getting off blocks? Where did these blocks happen? Where did they, you know, end? What kind of movement is our offensive line getting on our run game, et cetera? I mean, there's so much that can be done. It's just, it requires an investment for sure.
It's funny because when we've been embarking on this project, almost from the first time we showed the first cut of data to anybody, the questions have been, can you do practice? And like, theoretically, yes, it is, especially once we've moved into the tracking data realm, it's tricky. The various different dimensions and sort of filming options available in practice, not to mention the fact that a lot of the drills you might do that would be useful to track aren't 11 on 11. And then, so how do you fit that in the same paradigm? That's certainly something that going forward, I think that something you said earlier, Matt, about, you know, a staff that is relatively stable for a while, like it seems like that's a group that, if they had some more of this detailed information, could really like lock in on these are the 5 things we're looking for from this position group. And it has nothing to do with catches or yards or first downs. It's everything to do with sort of the underlying process of performance, of the reps being good regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, if you have a new staff, you're spending so much time on learning the verbiage of what you're going to do, learning, hey, this is our offense, this is what we think we want to try and do. You have to mix in recruiting here and there. But when you've been together, you know that, you know your offense, you know, it's like a second language to you, you know. And so when you are a more established staff, you have a little bit more time to dive into other things. And sometimes it's analytics, and sometimes coaches find other things to spend time on. But I think that's a great example. If you are a more established staff, you can really utilize this type of information to a deeper level.
Okay, so having really worked hard to get us past vibes, I'm going to let us wrap by going back to pure vibes. And, you know, we teased this, but Shane, what's on your meal plan for Saturday?
So the thing I'm hoping the most for is the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition. It's called a whoopie pie. Some people call it a gob, but it's a whoopie pie. It's basically, I prefer the pumpkin ones, but I'm guessing it'll be chocolate, kind of cookie type with the icing and then the other cookie on the bottom. So that's number one on my list that I want to see this weekend for dessert.
Okay. Oh, he went straight to dessert. Okay. I mean, we're.
I
was expecting something to do with meat.
Yeah, there'll be that for sure. But I'm a sweet tooth, so I like dessert.
So you're not particular. Just if it's coming off of a smoker or a grill and I can smell it and it's got that nice Maillard reaction on it, like I'm in. Is that you're not picky that way?
No, it's grazing. I'll have some of each of that.
All right. Yeah, and it's probably the same thing for Matt since he's got like a bottomless stomach. For someone like me who's got to pick and choose. Imagine you did have to pick and choose, Shane. What is your cooked meat one that if you're walking around you really want to get in on?
I probably lean towards ribs or burn ends. We tend to have pulled pork, which I also like. But I think the treat is more of the burn ends ribs.
I like ribs. I think that's a good one. If I'm walking around, it's hard to be like, hey, I would love a little steak, right? Like it's not easy to eat if you're on like a paper plate. I mean, Seth's holding up like he's gonna just grab it. Steak sandwich is all right.
Well, no, you do it KFC style and get 2 pieces of fried chicken and put the steak in between. And
okay, now you're talking. Now I see your thought process. I like that.
No, that's not that's don't do that. Unless you have a cardiologist on retainer.
No, but I do like a good smoked sausage or whatever that would be. It's a little easier to eat, and you're able to. It's portable, and so if it's done well, it could be a good addition to the old tailgate.
I can see our producer Kev, who it's closing in on dinner time for him. He's got the look on his face like see their friend sort of turn into the roast turkey with the smells wafting off of him, and he's just got that kind of, I can almost see the drool dripping down. So I think that's both a great mental image to leave you all with and a good place to stop. And I will be back next week, and we came up with a ton of good topics that were really too much to get into this week. But I think next week, one of the ones we're really going to dive into as we really hit this transfer window proper is the front officeification almost of the college game, and I'm really excited to dig into that with folks. So Matt, Shane, anything else you want to touch on before we close this one out?
No, it was great to be here. Glad to get the first one under my belt.
Yeah, big props to Shane. Nice job.
You made it. You didn't start talking when you were muted once. It was the first time I was ever on the Starters or the Basketball Jones or whichever, which is one of the longest running sports podcasts ever. Like they brought me on and I started talking and they were just like, dude, you're muted. And it's like, oh my God, that's the rookiest move ever. So you avoided that. So congrats there. And thanks for coming on and joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Matt, recharge your Baja Blast material and
it wasn't good enough this week. I'll be back.
We'll be back. You were still reeling from the socks I showed on Monday. So
that's true.
We'll do better next time there. And on that end, for Matt and Shane, Seth, we will talk at you again later.